All right, so let me go here. There we go. All right, let's talk a little bit about Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson became president. He was a Democrat. He became president in 1913. He was elected as a Democrat um, in 1912, and that's something that's interesting, as we talked about before. I mean, Woodrow Wilson was a progressive. Theodore Roosevelt was aggressive. Was a progressive. Theodore Roosevelt was a um, Republican. Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat. So the progressives, you had Republican and Democratic progressives. And William Howard Taft was a Republican and a progressive. He was the president between the time that Theodore Roosevelt and Wilson were presidents. Wilson was the only president, I think, that we've ever had to hold a PhD. He received his doctorate from Johns Hopkins University. And like a lot of academics, or people that go and get graduate degrees, especially doctorate degrees, they tend to be very, very idealistic. And Wilson was also, very, very idealistic. And idealism is good. We need idealistic people, but sometimes it gets you in trouble. And you have to find that medium ground. When World War I started, now listen, World War I lasted from 1914 to 1918, when there was a ceasefire, and then the Treaty of Versailles, which officially ended the war, was signed in 1919. Wilson wanted neutrality. He wanted to maintain America's neutrality. There were some people in the United States that were for the Allies, all right, which are the countries that became our allies later on, that were for the British, for example. But there were other Americans that were for what was called the Central Powers, or Germany and Austria-Hungary. And do some reading on your own, all right, because I don't want to give you everything, because I want y'all to read the chapters. Well. There's a lot of Americans that are of German descent, and back then there were a lot of Americans that still spoke German. So it was of course there were going to be some people that were for the Central Powers, and there were a lot of people that were neutral. So I think there's a question on the test asking you that, and what you want to remember is that it really was from one end of the spectrum to the other in terms of America, who America supported and what Americans wanted. Most supplies, however, went to Great Britain. So in a way, the U.S. was not really neutral. And the reason that it went to Great Britain was because the British had such a good blockade, all right, and would not allow American ships to go and sell supplies to the Germans. So Americans, at the beginning in 1914, I mean, we're Americans. This is a way to make money. So we were selling supplies to both sides. That's probably why Wilson wanted to maintain neutrality. So the British blockade against Germany was very effective, and it led to Germany's use of unrestricted submarine warfare, which meant that the Germans, because they had an inferiority to the British Navy, the British had a superiority on the seas. The one thing that the Germans had was the Unterseeboot, or the submarines, the under the sea boats. All right, and they started unrestricted submarine warfare, which meant anything that they would see, they would fire torpedoes and try to sink it. Because if they surfaced, all right, they never had a chance. If it was a British warship, they would not have had a chance. So anything that they saw floating, whether it was a British warship, whether it was an American merchant ship that was bringing supplies over, or whether it was your pawpaw's canoe that you used to go canoeing on the Calcasieu with, they would try to blow it out of the water. Make sure you know what the Zimmerman Note is. I mean, the Zimmerman Note was one of the reasons America got involved in the war. So again, I could talk about it, but I want you to do some of this on your own and study very carefully Wilson's 14 points. This was something that he was trying to pass at the Treaty of Versailles, And one of the things that was in the Wilson's 14 points, and again, it was very idealistic, was that Wilson wanted to create a League of Nations, which was sort of a precursor to the United Nations today. And actually, they did that, although ironically, the United States did not join. And the League of Nations, we will see later on, turned out to be really ineffectual. All right. Now, something else that happened in 1917 during the World War I was the Bolshevik Revolution, also known sometimes as the Communist Revolution. There were two revolutions in 1917. There was one revolution in February. There was another revolution in October. And oftentimes revolutions do not turn out that well. I mean, that's one of the things that, obviously some people are worried about. And in Egypt today and in Tunisia and these places that they're having revolutions, oftentimes revolutions don't turn out too well, like I said. And that was the case with the revolution in Russia. But as a result of that, what occurred in the United States is something that's called the Red Scare. Now, this is something that was similar to what happened after World War II as well. Sort of this American kind of paranoia that the communists were going to take over. Of course, that never happened. Make sure that you read as much as you can about the Treaty of Versailles. This was signed in 1919. Versailles is a palace on the outskirts of Paris. I mean, it's very, very, very nice. And the Treaty of Versailles was humiliating, and this is what I want you to remember. It was humiliating to Germany. Even though there was a ceasefire, the British continued a blockade around Germany. And so Germany pretty much had to sign it. And one of it was the war guilt clause, which basically stated that Germany and Germany alone was the cause of World War I. And if you read about the causes of World War I, that was not the case. I mean, sure, was Germany a major cause of it? Yes, but they were not the only cause of World War I. I mean, that's very important to remember. And it pretty much disarmed Germany. Germany was not allowed to have a military. I mean, it had a little military of about 100,000 troops, but that was it. And this humiliation of Germany pretty much led eventually to the rise of Hitler, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. And that pretty much concludes the study guide. Obviously, this doesn't cover every single thing on the test, but if you watch this and you listen and you take notes and you study this, what I went over, and then you read over the chapters, you should do pretty well on the test. I mean, you could even make 100. All right, so there's 50 multiple choice questions, and that will be open all day Wednesday, but you will only have a certain amount of time. I only want you to spend about an hour and 15 minutes on this test. It should not take you any longer than an hour and 15 minutes, and once you start, make sure that you continue, okay? In other words, don't stop and go back because it won't let you. I mean, if you stop at 10 and something happens and you have to leave and you click off, it's not going to let you go back on. So make sure you have a good hour and 15 minutes to take the test with very few distractions. Okay? I hope everybody does well, and make sure you let me know if you have any questions.